Ahora sí, vamos a entrar de lleno a lo que nos convoca esta mañana, que es la primera sesión plenaria de hoy. Y va a tratar un tema que nos preocupa a todos. Es el futuro de la educación y el empleo en la era de la automatización.
Work. What a piece of work. Digitization is changing the way we think about jobs and education. On the one hand, we're still trying to understand the effects of robots on our job posts. We will need to learn complex new abilities, which can prove to be challenging in a world with an aging population. But on the other hand, AI is expected to create 2.3 million jobs by next year. Robots can free us from repetitive and dangerous jobs, and more time for creativity might bring new businesses. So let's widen our knowledge and our world, a world made in the Americas.
Muy bien, ya planteado entonces el tema, vamos a invitar a los expositores y al moderador de este panel. Vamos a dar la bienvenida a Atul Ballista, presidente de Neo Group, organismo que también colaboró muchísimo para el éxito de esta cumbre. Un aplauso aquí a Atul. Y gracias también a Neo Group por el apoyo. Lo acompaña Nicolás Grossman, líder de investigación económica y relevancia para América Latina de McKinsey & Company. Carolina Aguirre, codirectora del Centro de Tecnología y Sociedad de la Universidad de San Andrés. José Roberto de Paiva, director general de Argentina de ABB. Y Juan Bello, vicepresidente de Soluciones Digitales de Global Logic. Los escuchamos.
Good morning. Morning. It seems like you guys are well rested after the festivities last night. So we're going to start this morning with this panel discussion that's going to be focused on retraining, education, and unemployment, or for that matter, actually employment, that's changing the way, the impact that's happening because of automation. And before we do that, I just want to say, I think we're very fortunate in our region, when I talk about LATAM and the Caribbean region, that we have an organization like IDB that's focused on funding, promoting events like this and other investments that they're making in making sure that there is a richness to the education and employment opportunities that are happening. So I think kudos to IDB for doing that. So let me set the context for this panel. And we have a great representation of research, consulting, education, and of course, corporations, both buy side and supply side. I don't know if you noticed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Amazon announced that they're going to invest $700 million over the next 5 years to retrain over 100,000 of their employees. Why? Because they fundamentally are recognizing that two things are happening. One is that the technology component of their employees' jobs is significantly rising, and so everybody, in a sense, needs to be retrained because the technology component is going up dramatically. The other thing that's happening is, for example, last year, the World Economic Forum did a study, and they predicted that in the next 4 years, 75 million jobs would be eliminated, but because of automation. But 135 million new jobs were going to be created because of automation, right? And these jobs are not the same jobs of today. And so they require significant investment and significant training. One of the other interesting things that I think we'll talk about is if you think about areas for online training such as EDX. EDX is a venture that was created by Harvard and MIT. And many companies like Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, and others, instead of looking for people just with degrees, they're also looking for people with certifications, right? So these do not require a degree. Today, for example, Amazon has over 20,000 jobs that are open, and the reason they're open is because they can't find people to fill those jobs. So we often think about automation as job loss, and I think we forget that if you go back to history and even look at manufacturing, you will find that more jobs were actually created because of automation than were actually lost. And I think a number of these studies are predicting the similar things that are happening now. Of course, they're different. And, my teams and I probably talk to over 100 CIOs, CTOs, chief risk officers every year from Global 2000 companies. And the number one thing that I hear is their inability to hire the right talent. And if you look at today compared to 20 years ago or 10 years ago, they're no longer looking for talent just exactly where they are, right? It's not just in Columbus, Ohio, or New York City. They're looking for that talent in Buenos Aires, in Bogota, in Santiago. So that search for talent, of course, India and China and other places, it's become truly global. And so all of us have that opportunity. So let me start the first question to our panel. Carolina, why don't we start with that? Because I think one of the things I'm going to try and do with the first question is focused on education and retraining, is try to give you a perspective that focuses on what governments and associations are doing, but also what corporations are doing. So maybe you can start with a perspective. What do you see universities, for example, doing in terms of having this education or promoting this education that focuses on the jobs that are changing because of automation?
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss one of the issues that we think are on the top priority of the agenda of any country in the world and any region, but particularly for a developing region such as Latin America and the Caribbean. I think we face particular challenges because in the way our economies are structured, the way our main exports, raw materials, etc. So our economies face great challenges with automation, but we also face great opportunities. Considering one of the key issues that many of the reports coming from OECD and developing regions is aging population. So this is a trend that we also see in Latin America, but we have 160 million youth. So this is important because in the jobs of the future, we have a generation that is closer to the digital transformation that we are looking for. I am skeptical of this idea of the millennials, the centennials, and the appropriation of technology by the younger generation, but in the terms of the thorough understanding of how technology works. But it is true that if we have generations of people who have grown up with a cell phone, grown with the internet, and understanding the implications of how technology is embedded in their everyday life, then I think we have an opportunity here in the region. We also see governments, and the government of Argentina and through the Ministry of Education, and the process of the G20 when the incorporation of the future of work and the whole concept of reskilling and discussing the programs and the work that both the Ministries of Work and the Ministries of Education should work together to address this challenge, and we see some concrete outcomes coming in the past months. For example, the development of a comprehensive curriculum in the public sector in Argentina from kindergarten to high school, where coding, programming, and robotics are part of the curricula, of the national curricula. So this actually is pushing some of the schools in the private sector to think about how will their curriculum be adapted to this pressure coming from the government now to sort of setting up a higher standard for this future. The challenges are many, of course, and again, because of the skills required in the digital age and in the future of work are not only just related with coding, and many studies are showing that a deeper understanding of how technology works and a thorough understanding of the fundamentals of computer science in many respects is something that we do not have to undermine or to underestimate in how we are developing and designing curriculums for the future. And something that I wanted to sort of, not because I want to promote necessarily the work at my university, but it just shows the attention that this younger generation is paying to the opportunities of digital business and design and the digital age in a different way. So these are two undergraduate programs that have opened in the last 2 years at San Andres, the university where my center is based, and they've had record, but I mean 160 new applicants for this undergraduate program. I mean, when traditionally we are talking about sometimes 15, 20, 30 maximum students in a cohort, 160, 60 students for the new design undergraduate program again, and a comprehensive, transversal, transdisciplinary thinking about design in our digital world. So this is showing again that the young people have an approach where they want to understand the world through a different lens. And maybe, and I've also discussed this with the professors who are working with this program, is that maybe in the future talking about digital businesses, or digital business is kind of redundant, and this will be business as such. Right. In the future. So
I think you make a really interesting point, right? We often talk about retraining, and the focus there is entirely on employers, but what the fact that you're talking about is that some of this change in education is actually starting at the kindergarten level, right? Starting it much earlier. Juan, we were just talking a little bit before about this whole speed of change, right? When we talk about some of these programs, change in education, we saw them in the past that there were curriculums that were changed over 10 years or 20 years. Talk to us a little bit about when you think about this educational and retraining in corporations and the pace of change, how are you keeping up with it in your organization?
Yes, actually, that's, in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges we face. I mean, when we were kids, typically the grown-ups asked us, what do you want to be when you're grown up? And that sort of question is completely irrelevant nowadays because the speed of change and of technologies and the speed where education will need to happen is much shorter. So now you need to develop a lot of new skills, soft skills and hard skills, in a span of time of months or a couple of years maximum for some disciplines. In that way, corporations need to catch up where university or formal education system ends, or start collaborating in order to speed up those retraining processes. What we do as a company on a global basis is first to invest a huge amount of hours of retraining and education for our workforce and for applicants, for candidates, not only on new technologies or algorithms or new sciences, but also in soft skills. Because it's not only enough to learn a technology, but the developers and the whole workforce need to start thinking in completely new, different ways. From how should we interact with bots and algorithms, to how we design this algorithm to optimize or to evaluate a huge amount of data, or to perform artificial vision or medical diagnosis with the minimum amount of energy and time required. So that push a lot of pressures on corporations in order to have a new role. It's not only about creating technologies, creating business, but also about developing the skills and capabilities required to do so.
So how are you doing that, for example, at Global Logic?
Global Logic, we have a learning program, which is, it's not mandatory for everyone, but it's accessible to everyone. We spend hundreds of hours a year in new trainings. That training is actually performed and designed by the same working teams, so we don't take the risk of becoming obsolete while we design the training process. So we have a huge capacity of response and adaptation to the new challenges and new requirements in terms of education. If in a particular project we foresee that we will need more people savvy in, let's say, natural language processing algorithm, the same team is going to design and implement a training program or capabilities, what we call boot camps, in order to design and provide that new set of education and training.
Wonderful. Jose, you and I were talking about the same topic, and you talked to me about an economist survey. Would it be the right time for you to bring this up?
Yep. Well, first of all, just to complement a little bit what has been said here, from the company perspective, of course, we continue to develop the knowledge, the technical knowledge. I mean, like it has been new technologies and so on, training the people in new technology. But we are also focusing much more today in soft skills, right? So resilience, for example. I mean, most of us here knows how fast things are changing and how, let's say, hard is to face all these changes in the everyday. So the stress is in general in a higher level. So we have this resilience training in the company, collaborative work in the company, in the training in the company, because we do believe that the new job is much more collaborative than what has been done so far. I mean, talking about what you just mentioned, I mean, The Economist and ABB have done a survey, which is the automation readiness in the countries. So in this first case, it was the end of 2018, sorry, there were 25 countries, only 25 countries surveyed, some of them in Latin America. And 3 areas were basically the base of this evaluation. One is let's say, the country environment for innovation, right? How the country is prepared for this innovation. Then the policy, the learning policies, the schools and things like that, and also the policies for labor, the labor policies in the country. These 3 areas were, and let's say, although the countries in Latin America have taken positions not to in the first range, Germany, for example, you and I were discussing about Germany policies, labor policies yesterday. Do you remember? So it's not a surprise that they are in the 2nd place in this area, just beside the South Korea. Yeah. Right. But Argentina, and this is good, I know that we have lots of Argentina here, is good that you know, have been in the 17th place in this area, in this survey. And let's say, much helped, it was the first in Latin America, much helped by the education, which was the 12th, the number 12. In Argentina. So it's important to understand that there is a great opportunity for the country right now, let's say, to face the future, because the system, the education system here is already better prepared, not there yet, but it's better prepared than the competitors in the region, for example, to face this new era. And I have a personal example of this in our company. I mean, we have about 100 engineers that are right now developing solutions that have been taken into the global portfolio of the company with innovation, real innovations that have been developed here in San Telmo, right? And there's a lot of work doing. We are in connection with the universities because it's a good, let's say, match. We want the best students for the future. They want to understand where the technology is moving. So this connection with the university is very important. So, I mean, for the Argentina, it's an opportunity for the future. I mean, in this new area, I think Argentina is, from the education point of view, very well positioned.
Yeah. No, I think you make a very good point. It's not just about specific technical training, but the overall readiness level of the students or the employees that exist, because change is happening fast, and that readiness is what enables them to kind of move on to the next role. Nicholas, at McKinsey, you focus on research across LATAM, particularly focused on the new economy. Talk to us a little bit about your experience in terms of what are successful programs or practices are you seeing across the region that are helping, employees be more ready for some of this change that we're seeing because of automation?
Sure. First, let me try first to take perhaps a step back and try to synthesize and connect the dots, because I heard a lot of really, really important things about a really, really big and topic, very, very trendy topic. And I think the first point that came up that is very relevant is we're seeing major disruption in the education market. We always talk about innovation disruption, but I think we're seeing a lot of acceleration, and the scale is a little bit like we've never seen before. And I think it helps me a little bit when thinking of this to understand where are we seeing this disruption, and then to go to your question is, I think we're seeing two types of disruptions, both on what education can do, and I think on what we need from education in general for the economy and from the society. So both in terms of supply and demand. And on the supply side, you see a lot of changes. You see a lot of changes in the competitive dynamic and traditional players competing with more digital natives like MOOCs. You're seeing that geographic boundaries are becoming more blurrier because of digital platforms. You're seeing players offering new types of products and services, like Carolina was saying, there's a lot of new programs that are very exciting. You're seeing changes in how students and teachers interact, and how you can keep track of learning. There's a lot of things. But perhaps the angle I focus most is also, what do we need from education? What are the changes that are affecting the demand side? And there I see a lot of things that are happening that are very relevant. I think number one is we are seeing demand for new types of skills. You're seeing big changes in the types of skills that organizations need. And of course, we heard the example from Global Logic on some programs trying to capture that. For instance, one thing we see is a lot of increased demand for technological and digital skills, advanced cognitive skills, and socioeconomic and socio-emotional skills. So basically, you're seeing increased demand for everything that has to do with interacting with machines and with things where humans have a competitive advantage over machines, which makes a lot of sense. And second, we need education systems in general to be more granular. I think more and more we're thinking not of occupations and big programs and majors and degrees. We're thinking more of activities. We're thinking more of skills. We need more granular thinking in terms of what we do and what we need. In line with this, I think we also need more flexibility, because we're seeing a lot of disruptions. So you need to rethink a little bit your portfolio all the time, because what you need right now may not need what you need in 5 years from now. And to give you an example, for instance, a lot of the occupations where you see a lot of demand right now did not exist 15 years ago. For instance, right now, you go to LinkedIn and you see a lot of demand for people doing digital marketing, data scientists, UX designers. Even one thing I know, you have video games trainers, which I personally love, a lot of the demand for that. These occupations did not exist 10, 15 years ago. So there's a lot of churning, and you need to rethink that all the time. Fourth, I think you need a closer link to the demand. I think we usually see a lot of disconnect between education and employment, and this gap is widening. I think there's no more room for that. If we really want to tackle the major challenges imposed by automation, We need to do something about this gap between what the society needs and what the people need and what education is offering. So I think we need to close that gap. And I think finally, we need to put more focus on lifelong learning. I think traditionally we used to think as I'm born, I'm a toddler, then I go to school, I learn, then I work. This is no longer true. This is, I mean, it's still true, but it's no longer what the real world demands from us. I think we need to be learning all the time. And to perhaps give you an example that connects a little bit of these dots, I mean, at McKinsey, we launched a social initiative called Generation, which is a separated NGO that is focused a little bit on employing youth people and trying to learn about skills and activities where there's a lot of demand. These trainings are usually very intense, very quick, very fast. The portfolio changes all the time, and the training is not focused on come here to learn about this, it's focused more on come here to learn what you need to do to get this type of job, because I know there's a lot of demand for this job, and I have these employers behind it. So the placement rate that we see for the program is above 90%, which is more than double that traditional learning programs. I mean, this is, I think, the type of innovation that we need, the one that gives you the new skills that are demanded, that is more granular, more tactical. Maybe you don't need the 4-year program. I mean, we still need it, but we also need something that is more tactical, particularly for the vulnerable people, for the people that cannot afford to study 6 years, that they need a fast solution. We need the granularity, the flexibility, the link with the private sector, and we need emphasis on continuous learning.
Right.
Just a comment. In ABB, we are, let's say, we talk about moving from the learn to do to learn, because at the end of the day, you have to learn so many things that you have to start learning differently. I mean, to add so many things that you have to learn, this is how we treat this.
Yeah, I think, so there's a few threads that I want to kind of maybe explore a little bit more. You talked about flexibility. It's interesting when you see corporate programs now, they're, like Amazon, for example, recognizes that not only is the technology component of jobs changing, so let's provide that retraining for its employees, but they also recognize that certain jobs are just going to disappear. But there's other areas where there's jobs where there's still a lot of openings. As an example, so they have a program called Choices, where if you want to be a nurse, as an example, right? Amazon doesn't provide anything related to nursing, but they'll reimburse 95% of the tuition for that. So they're recognizing that from a flexibility of career perspective, some people will stay in, and they want them to stay in because they recognize that replacing a worker costs about 21% of comp, much cheaper to actually retain them, but they also recognize that there'll be new careers that come up. I saw 2 programs as I was doing research in this area that in particularly Sweden and Germany stood out, and that kind of leads to my next question on employability. In Sweden, the labor unions got together and basically created a program that focuses on matchmaking. So they instead of fighting automation, they recognize that that path is going to continue. So let's figure out what training programs need to exist for their union members to find their next job. So they very aggressively provide training and retraining and provide almost like a safety net. And their finding is that over 40% of the displaced workers get jobs at higher compensation, which, in many countries is the opposite. When you lose it, you get a lower. In Germany, they took their unemployment agency. If you think about most unemployment agencies, they dole out checks, right? They made their unemployment agency a matchmaking agency in Germany. So their role is actually matching that displaced employee to their next job. And those are the things. So let's talk about this now, moving from maybe education to employability or employment. And let's maybe focus on what are corporations doing how are they rethinking employment, both from a perspective of who they hire, how they grow them, but also think about, when we think about at home, we look at the amount of workforce as freelancers is the fastest growing segment. And so think from both, corporation and an education perspective, how, in your view, is employment changing? And because I think we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to throw the next question as part of this is it creating new opportunities for startups? I'll open it up to anybody who wants to jump in.
Yes, first, we must acknowledge that in terms of employment or future of employment jobs, we still have a lot to learn. The model where the people works for you and comes to the office and perform a task that someone else assigned to him, it's completely outdated. That's not happening any longer. So first, as companies, we must ensure first greater diversity. We need to become more flexible in order to adapt ourselves to the new challenges. And that flexibility comes out from diversity, from multicultural companies with different point of views, from people with different backgrounds and different kind of educations. Now, in that way, there is a greater opportunity for startups to start popping up, because clearly when you have such level of disruption, bigger companies faces bigger challenges in order to reinvent themselves. It's easier for a startup to be born flexible and diverse than for a big company to become flexible and diverse. So in that way of thinking, the first corporation needs to embrace that level of change and disruption. We need to adapt ourselves to these new scenarios by acknowledging that we still have a lot to learn, and not precisely from our senior management or industry gurus. Sometimes we need to learn a lot about people who has learned or invented something out of thin air, because that's the level of change we are facing. And in many disciplines, the technological and philosophical change in the way we work has come from areas like biology or sociology or psychology. Our teams are nowadays being built up of engineers, as always, designers, lawyers, psychologists, designers, artists. So that sort of differences and diversity will create a green field for tons of small companies and initiatives to grow and to thrive in this new economy. But there is another challenge, and this is very important. This level of change and the speed of change will also create a challenge. We face, as an industry, the challenge of lack of people, lack of employees to fulfill all the requirements we have in terms of workforce. But there's also a gap between the cultural and the human capital available in different regions and the level of education they require to catch up with the new skills and new capabilities they require in order to be inserted in the new economy. So as a system, as an economy, as a society, we need to address both. The challenges of companies retraining, reinventing the workforce, and the challenges of people accessing this new sort of trainings and new capabilities development programs.
Right.
Well, we do believe in that there will come a total different social contract, a total new social contract, and the relationship between companies and the employees and employer will be totally different in the, let's say, new future. We are talking about, let's say, moving from work led by humans to a collaborative work together, man-machine, sometimes led by the machine, right? And that will come, for sure, right? We are talking about, let's say, the productivity, for example. Today we talk about productivity, but we don't have a lot of transparency in the way that productivity is measured. But with the data, with all the data that we are getting from whatever we do, we will have a much better view on what productivity is. Physical. People may be here, maybe in, I don't know, in Shanghai or whatever. It's not necessary that the people is in the company anymore. So we talk about, let's say, not the talents going to the work, but the work moving to the place where the talents are. And that will mean more competition for our engineers here, because you can always access knowledge everywhere. So it's a huge transformation that is coming.
Probably see as a great challenge the social capital that is required for entrepreneurs to flourish and develop. It's something that is not necessarily acquired through formal education or training. So, so here is where we need kind of robust public policies, and because you need a network, you need public-private partnerships, you need an enabling environment where this kind of culture can thrive. And there is evidence that the entrepreneurial spirit in Argentina and in other countries in the region is not necessarily attached to a particular, the higher economic and social segments of societies, but you need to be a little bit more democratic and really oriented at providing those opportunities and the framework for people from less well-off backgrounds to be able to capture this spirit.
Yeah, and I think that point was illustrated really well yesterday by Mr. Kim, when he's leading the Born to Global Center in South Korea. Is talking about risk and return and how, one of the roles governments can play is reduce some of the risk for our entrepreneurs to take that, to go after an opportunity. Nicholas, do you want to add to the conversation?
I think I had a lot of really very interesting comments. Just perhaps to add a little bit on both things, on the transformation of the workplace and the startup and the opportunities for startup. I think on the workplace thing, I think we heard a lot about. I think there's like a new contract, new ways to interact, remote, independent work, the rise also of freelancers, the gig economy, new forms of payments. I would like to add one more thing that I think was kind of implicit there. You also need the organizations to transform, to react to that. The way an organization operates right now that is very rigid and hierarchical, I think that is no longer what we need. That old-fashioned way of doing things, I think it goes way against this world of disruption. As you say, you need something that is way more flexible and agile. So now we're moving to agile organizations that can react very quickly, that are more collaborative, non-hierarchical, that iterate around prototypes. I think that's the kind of things we want to start seeing in terms of how organizations interact and make decisions. And I think on the startup thing, building a little bit on Carolina's point, I think two things. I think one is I think the digital. I'm thinking of the digital and knowledge-based ecosystem on what they offer. I think what they bring to the economy is good. I mean, they create value. I mean, I think that at the macro level, I mean, the facts go in that direction, mostly because they bring productivity. They're some of the most productive businesses. They create well-paid jobs. These are some of the most important sectors in terms of exports as well. So they're a little bit of becoming the engine of growth for the global economy. And this is also happening in Argentina, where it's already one of the top three, like the knowledge-based sector is one of the top three sectors in Argentina, depending on how you measure. But I think a really, really, really big point, I think, here is perhaps the most important role that it should play, it's not what the direct impact that it has by providing jobs and productivity, but the dissemination that it has throughout the economy and how the new skills and technologies can benefit players in traditional value chains. And there is where I still don't see a lot of impact yet, and I'm quite seeing what the risk that you are emphasizing, because what you see right now is that the businesses and the individuals that are benefiting the most from automation technologies and other technologies that are not linked to automation is that it's benefiting the players that were already doing well. So there is a big risk of increasing inequality and putting pressure on the most vulnerable people. And when you think of automation, you get like a double whammy, because also automation puts more pressure on occupations that are more predictable, repetitive. Usually these are occupations that are linked to lower education requirements, typically where the vulnerable class works. So there's a lot of pressure on vulnerable businesses and households right now. So I think there's a big call, as Carolina was saying, for government policy here to try to balance the field and make sure the value we're creating, the innovation, is inclusive. And by the way, to me, I'm not going to call out on the government. You were giving a great example of unions and the government working together. You need a broad, collaborative agenda across sectors. I think we need to understand that this is happening. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's already happening. This is going to affect all of us, and it can benefit all of us, and it can also create a lot of disruption and negative impact for a lot of people. Now, if we work together and we focus on expanding the pie and making sure everyone benefits from that, we can get to the good equilibrium. But if we do nothing, if we're lazy, if we don't react on time, maybe we can end up in a pretty bad equilibrium where only very few people capture a lot of the benefit and a lot of people suffer from that disruption.
To add up on what Nicolas said, that's one of the biggest issues in terms of the agenda for policymakers. First, because most of the training and education is costly, and typically the most vulnerable people had to work extra hours to get their basic income, so it's very unlikely that they will be able to afford this retraining and reskilling, number one. But also about the outcomes of the innovation. We've been working for years on building business technology. I think that now we have reached a point where we need to start creating value not only for new business technology, but to achieving new levels of inclusivity, new levels of optimization of energy consumption, and we need to start using these new technologies to create a more sustainable and more equal society. And that's a collective job between private sector and public sector. Those issues must be part of the agenda of how, with technology, we will shape the future of our society.
No, I think you guys make great points, right? So we have a lot of these challenges. There's a lot of new solutions coming out, but often they tend to go towards the ones that already have access to those. We have to make sure these are more inclusive. We're running out of time, so let me wrap up the panel by maybe sharing a couple of stories that illustrate some of the opportunities that arise because of some of these changes that we're seeing. You know, back in 1997, Cisco started the Networking Academy, and the reason they started it is they donated some equipment, and when they found was that the receiver had no knowledge about how to do networking. So they ended up setting up a class to teach people how to do networking. You know, I'm talking about Cisco routers and others. Now Cisco has over 10,000 centers around the world that educate and certify. This is not four-year programs. These are certifications that certify over 1.2 million students a year now. And a majority of these 10,000 centers are run by entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs that are running maybe a center or 10 centers. Similar opportunities like that are multiplying. I think most corporations today don't have in-house training departments. They have online training. These online courses are often created by universities or independent small companies. Tremendous opportunity there. The other thing I want to end you with is, I think in many sectors, the power is changing to the employee rather than the employer. And there's a great site out there, if you get a chance, take a look at it. It's called Hire Me. And this is where, when you get a job offer, you post it on Hire Me, and employers then bid on you to hire you. With that note, thank you very much to the panel for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.